We're ready for the start. They're off.
And welcome in, everybody. It's a special Friday edition of the First Call podcast. Jeremy Plonk, not Jeff Siegel this week. Jeff's on the road in Las Vegas covering some college basketball. Tough gig if you can get it, watching the Bruins this weekend in Vegas. I'm joined by an old friend, Jim Byers from Lone Star Park. Jim and I worked together at Remington Park many moons ago, and it's a big weekend in Texas with the $1 million Texas Classic Futurity on Saturday. So what better time to reconnect? Jim, how you doing, pal?
I'm doing great. It's incredible. It's been 24 years, I guess, since we've shared a microphone. But yeah, doing fine, and can't believe I'm already in my 7th year at Lone Star Park.
Yeah. I mean, you've had a storied career in race calling going back to Southern California in the 80s, and you made the move to Remington Park back in 88 when the track first opened. That was a big deal back then. I mean, people who don't know, Edward DeBartolo Sr. owned the Remington Park when it first was built. And, of course, the 49ers were his football franchise at the time. And this was a big deal. This would be like Robert Kraft starting a racetrack today. Yeah. And when Remington Park opened, Jim, you were the first voice there. To make that move from California to Oklahoma City, tell us a little bit about what went into that.
Well, I had worked at Hollywood for 4 years in the 80s, and it was a great opportunity. I mean, I had memories that were tremendous. The problem was the management was a bit unstable. I was very young, not really prepared for a job of that magnitude at that point. Thought I wanted to do other things, other sorts of play-by-play, which ultimately I ended up doing in the 2000s. But left Hollywood of my own accord when things were getting a little sticky there. The end of the 80s, and after a few months looking for work, wound up at Remington. And the first few years at Remington were tremendous. I mean, just great management, lots of excitement. It was a big deal. You know, pre-simulcasting, you talked to the people that were down below you, and we had lots of people downstairs every day. And, you know, it still was a very nice place, and it still remains that way to this day. Yeah. But eventually I left in 99 to do baseball and ultimately hockey, and found my way back in the sport with, oddly enough, Remington and Lone Star are sister tracks.
Right.
Long ago, not owned by the DeBartolos, but it was quite a memorable time, and wound up in this region of the country from the late 80s.
Let's take you back to the 80s here. I found this on YouTube. You had a chance to call one of the all-time great horses in John Henry. Let's go back and take a look at a young Jim Byers and listen in as you called the legend.
And they're at the top of the stretch. Loose Sense with a short lead. Then it's Load to Cannons. Galanvert on the outside. John Henry moving between horses. With 1/8 of a mile to go, there's 4 horses battling for the lead. Here comes John Henry moving along the rail, and Galanvert on the outside. Galanvert on the outside. John Henry on the inside. John Henry with a short lead. And John Henry does it again. Winner of the Invitational in 84 by a neck.
1984, Jim. It's kind of like Dan Marino or somebody like that. You get to a Super Bowl, or you think, I'll be back here many times again. And to call John Henry that early in your career, have you ever called the horse in his same pantheon?
No, he's the greatest that I ever called as far as notoriety. I mean, I wound up calling races with Ali Sheba and horses like that during those 4 years. But and if I had my audio muted, but if that was the Galanvert race for Charlie Whittingham, Galanvert just had his heart broken. I mean, it looked like he was going to go on and win that race. That was about a month into my tenure at Hollywood. I later saw John Henry.
Wow.
Yeah, that was Memorial Day. That was what I believe now is the Charlie Whittingham Stakes. In those days, it was a Hollywood Invitational. And then he ran in the Gold Cup on the main track, won by Desert Wine a month later. And then he ran in the Sunset Handicap at Hollywood at the end of the meet. So I called him 3 times. But he broke Galanvert's heart there. But he was the greatest. I mean, he remains, for me, the greatest I ever called. And I saw Royal Heroine and a lot of other really nice horses out there. But, it was fun. But like I say, I sometimes say I was kind of like a Rule 5 pick in baseball that gets thrown into the big leagues, a little young. Couldn't really develop out there. I really developed at Remington, I would say.
And you and I worked together for, you worked more years at Remington than I did, but I worked 4 and we crossed over. Jim, here we are in a younger era. This from the Remington Media Guide from, I think, 97. You're the only guy in the picture with a tie, which tells us you were the classy guy of this operation here. The rest of us were young and trying to make our way. I had much more hair in the back left there. And look at the guy in the far left corner, Dale Day, trying to, hop in that picture there, and Dale's still the voice of Remington to this day, one of your predecessors there at Remington Park, and that guy doesn't age. Dale Day looks the same now as he did there in 1997. We would all be lucky to have his genes, I think.
I think so. We also crossed paths with Don Stevens, who's now at Delta Down. So for a while, we had me and Don and Dale, current or future track announcers, and yourself, future podcasting, writing, and media mogul. That was a deep staff. And then Keith Stallbories, who was the taller person in that picture. Keith and I still do. He's to my left there in back. Keith and I still work on shows for his Raceview network. So we're still affiliated all these years later. And Melanie
Wignall, bottom left, went on to become a really good producer of track and field and other sports for ESPN and has had a nice career. We reconnected on the night school program. She helped me produce a couple videos there. Robin Brooks, Toby Tyler, also in those photos there. Robin Brooks was the original face and spokesperson for Remington Park TV back in the early days. So a good one there. Also, one other reminiscence I want to give Jim is you and I kind of were on both sides of the media game. I wrote features about you, the man on the mic there. We had that in the media guide, and you got to call me run 5 furlongs on the turf after I guaranteed that Run Johnny could not lose. I believe it was the Remington Park Sprint Invitational or the Chuck Talaferro, I believe it was. And, of course, I had to live it up and run the race myself because he obviously did lose that day. And Highland Ice was the horse I guaranteed would win. And Run Johnny was the horse who beat him. So I'm forever indebted to Run Johnny for winning that race and forcing me to go. But we had a lot of fun back in those days, and it's great to be back with you. I want to kind of share some of those stories before we get into the nuts and bolts of this First Call podcast, because people who follow this over the last 3 years know when Jeff Siegel and I get together on Fridays, we're handicapping Saturday races. So we're going to put you to the test this weekend. No pressure, Jim. This is going to be just, a good handicapping discussion of 8 races around the country. For those of you who are listening in on our podcast, wherever you get your podcast audio-wise, we'll run down the lineup for you. Those of you watching the video version, you can see on the screen now. The 8 races we're going to look at for Saturday, November 19th, include 2 from Gulfstream. The creatively named Juvenile Fillies and Juvenile Stakes due to the calendar on Tapeta. They'll kick off our coverage. Then we'll go to the Chaluki Stakes, Grade 3 at Churchill, one of the few graded stakes races in the thoroughbred game this weekend. The Desi Arnaz at Del Mar, Saturday's feature. We'll look at that one. And then we've got 4 on the big card for Texas Classic Futurity night in Jim's backyard. He'll be calling these races. He'll give you his thoughts on the Yellow Rose of Texas, the B.F. Phillips Jr. Memorial Stakes, the Grade 1 Texas Classic Derby, and the Grade 1 Texas Classic Futurity. We will handicap all 8 of those over the next 20, 30 minutes or so. If you're playing this weekend with First Bet and Express Bet, and we sure hope you are, there's a $5,000 late pick 4 hit and split at Lone Star Park on races 8 through 11. That's going to take you through 3 of the major stakes, and then the 11th race, a maiden on the card. If you hit that late pick 4, not only do you get your pari-mutuel winnings, but you'll share in $5,000 in additional money just with players who hit the late pick 4 at Lone Star on Saturday night on the Express Bet and the First Bet platforms. And if you're not a pick 4 player, but you just want to play some straight win bets, got a good promo for you too. On races 6 through 10, all the stakes races Saturday night at Lone Star Park, there's a $10 money back special. That means you get up to $10 back in your account if your win bet finishes second or third in races 6 through 10 Saturday at Lone Star. Jim's going to give you the winners, though. You're not going to need that money back special. You'll be cashing on the win end. Jim, let's get to some handicapping here. Let's go to Gulfstream Park. It's race number 7 on the Saturday program. It's the Juvenile Fillies, 1 mile and 70 yards on the Tapeta surface. You were one of the original people to handicap over synthetic surfaces with the Equitrack at Remington Park back in 88. I think that followed just the Tartan track at Calder at that time. Might have been the second synthetic surface in the history of U.S. racing. So let's go to the synthetics on Saturday, the Tapeta at Gulfstream, race number 7, and tell the fans who you're looking at in this race, the Juvenile Fillies.
Well, we didn't reconnect after 24 years for me to try to give a bunch of favorites out. And although my picks in the Lone Star races are pretty formful, but the Lone Star meet has been to this point, about 39% winning favorites. Mm-hmm. And in Futurity and Derby finals, the cream usually rises to the top. But I'm going to try to beat some favorites, respecting O'Darlin in the race, who makes perfect sense on the stretch out. 2 sprints to a route. A lot of people like that angle. O'Darlin has the best buyers in the field by a good margin, but I'm gonna take a look at Navy Goat. This horse comes out of a Kentucky Downs, what it was essentially a 1-turn mile turf race, a maiden event. Opened up, got a really masterful Joel Rosario ride, very patient. Opened up just a tiny bit in the stretch. The margin at the call was a length, but might have gotten close to 2 lengths or a length and 3/4. The runner-up, Self-Confident, who returned to run 5th at Keeneland as a favorite in the subsequent race, made an impact, but wasn't really going to get to Navy Goat. I think this filly might have the distance experience. There's a question in my mind how many of these really want to their quality at 2 turns. Some have broken their maidens at 2 turns, but the quality at 2 turns. So I'm going to go with Navy Goat, understanding that, that was a big field at Kentucky Downs. The runner-up in that race is a CJ Thoroughbreds filly, or the 3rd place finisher, I should say. Behind Self-Confident was Audaciousness. CJ Thoroughbreds of Corey Johnson, one of my old bosses, and his son CJ, who came back to also run up the track in a Keeneland maiden race. But nonetheless, I'm going to try Navy Goat on a sort of a stamina angle, and the trainer does great on sit. Yeah,
Arnaud Delacour there. Navy Goat by Army Mule. This one is made for Philadelphia in November. This is the Army-Navy team up here with Navy Goat, Jim's pick in race number 7, that being the Juvenile Philly Stakes at Gulfstream Park. 10th race on Saturday at Gulfstream, Jim, is the Juvenile Stakes. This is, again, mile and 70 yards on the Tapeta surface. Of course, the Colts going into Juvenile, logically here speaking. We've got a field of 8 in this one. I thought on the outside, Super Blessing was a little bit interesting coming out of the Juvenile Sprint, a race where several of these exit. 4 of the 8 horses in this race have already won at a mile and 70 over the Synth, but I think there's a chance here for a stretch out horse. I gave Super Blessing a look in here. You had Sammy Camacho winning the Juvenile Fillies. I've got him winning the Juvenile, so Sammy's going to like what we've got to say about him with his mounts on Saturday. Who did you end up with here in the Juvenile Fillies?
This was the one race where I did, as a top pick, go with the favorite in Cheerful Charlie, 2-1 on the morning line. First time facing Florida breds. If you go back to the September 24th Armed Forces Stakes, this horse opened up a lead in the stretch and got caught by Lights of Broadway, but I thought it was still a pretty good race. We'll be taking a look at that here in a second. I think the time is kind of now for Cheerful Charlie. If he doesn't win this, I don't know where we'll be seeing him in a year from now, what type of race we'll be seeing him in. He's been knocking on the door. I lean to him. Another one I think is worth a look is Maximo, the 2. This horse was, a really good short comment in that Armed Forces, intent on the lead, and that's the exact way. I mean, this horse would not be denied the lead. And Pete Aiello even mentioned it in the call, and it wasn't the rider's fault. The horse just dragged him to that lead, and then he got gassed and tired. And so, they've gelded him. They're taking the blinkers off. I think he's kind of an intriguing one, too, off a race where he wound up, 6th and last.
Yeah, I think he might have had the connections pulling their hair out a little bit after that race. I mean, like, the blinkers come off to try to relax. They geld him to try to relax. They're pulling out everything they can because they know they have a horse who's got some talent, but you've got to harness it. Let's go back and take a look at that Armed Forces Stakes. You'll see Maximo on the lead down the backstretch trying to run off with it. Let's take you through that.
Maximo, less than 5 furlongs from home. He's on top by 3 while still under stout restraint. Cheerful Charlie is there second. On the far outside, it's Tigre. Lights of Broadway is moving between horses. Live as Life is next, and that shuffles Dangerous Ride, the last of the 6. They won a big-time second quarter as the half mile was 47-2. They leave the backstretch and move on to the far turn. Maximo has the lead, but how much is in reserve? He has the lead by 2 as they start to get after him. Cheerful Charlie is second and gaining ground. Lights of Broadway third at the rail. Live as Life is now fourth as they move to the top of the stretch. They've got to Maximo. His lead is gone as Cheerful Charlie is taken over. Lights of Broadway, Live as Life, Tigre, and Dangerous Ride. Cheerful Charlie, the one rolling on well. He's in front with Lights of Broadway taking aim. Live as Life is next. Down the center and Tigre with a late punch. There's an eighth of a mile to go. Marcos Meneses trying to get one more furlong from Cheerful Charlie. He's in front. Lights of Broadway takes another shot at him. Cheerful Charlie needs the wire. Here's Lights of Broadway surging forward. Photo finish, Lights of Broadway or Cheerful Charlie, then Tigre, and 141-4.
That's one of those where the horse probably struck the lead too early, right, Jim? You inherit the lead from the horse who's coming back like that, and Cheerful Charlie probably made the front too soon in there. Better timing in this race just from circumstance, nothing that he did wrong. It's just the Maximo just came back to him suddenly there at the top of the stretch, and you kind of inherit the lead. So certainly could see Cheerful Charlie with a more conventional trip in this race be successful. We know the mile and 70 is not a big deal. He got caught on the wire, but I let it go through the gallop out the show. He just galloped out evenly with the winner there. So he didn't come back to the winner. I think the favorite just kind of caught him in that one. So the Juvenile Stakes at Gulfstream Park, race number 10 on Saturday, is also our express bet and first bet race of the week. You can get my full analysis and write up for that race in the email newsletter. If you get that sent out each Thursday, each week, be sure to sign up for the mailing list at Express Bet and at First Bet. Jim, let's go back and take a look at the schedule of races we've got here on the podcast. We're 2 into this. We've got the Juvenile Fillies and Juvenile taken down at Gulfstream Park. We're going to switch our attention next to the Chaluki Stakes, Churchill Downs. And in the Chaluki Stakes, you've got a horse you've got your eye on here coming out of a race at Keeneland. Her name is Mariah's Princess. Let's take a look at her start last time out in Lexington.
Third, she's 5 from the front. Mariah's Princess has the lead. Will Secret, Lay Da Vida, then Bye Bye Birdie, a wide fourth. Final furlong, Lay Da Vida. Coming on from the outside to challenge Mariah's Princess, then Will Secret back toward the rail. Lay Da Vida, Vince Chaminade to the front. Lay Da Vida to win it. Mariah's Princess across the line in second.
Classic second best in there. Lay Da Vida was favored in that race at 3-2. But what I like about Mariah's Princess, your filly in there, she drew away from the horse in third. She ran her race. She just got beat by one better over in Lexington. Tell us what you like about her for the Chaluki Stakes, Jim.
Well, that was also Mariah's Princess's first race off a really long layoff since December of last year. She raced opening weekend at Oaklawn Park in 2021 and was a resounding winner in the Mistletoe and then went to the shelf. And I thought she ran really well fresh in that race that we just showed. Comes back second off the layoff. She's had a few weeks to kind of get over that. She definitely gets tested a bit here, I think. And that Chilean filly that won that race, Lay Da Vida, is 2 for 2 in the States and was a group winner down in Chile, I believe. And it could be a really nice South American import. And I just think that perhaps in this one-turn mile, Mariah's Princess, she stretched out fine to 2 turns, but she was also a somewhat useful sprinter in her earlier days. So she gets tested. Coach makes perfect sense in here. I mean, Brad Cox, she might be a little better on Lasix, and she might be a little better in a 2-turn mile than a 1-turn mile. That remains to be seen. But I just think Coach is going to be a really short price or a pretty short price. I'm just trying to beat her. And then, so that's why I lean toward Mariah's Princess there.
Curious to see what Jonathan Wong trainee Empire House has to offer coming east. Wong, one of the highest percentage trainers at Golden Gate Fields, sending some horses in different locales around the country here in recent months. Didn't have a ton of success with the horses he sent to Keeneland, but I'm interested to see how Empire House matches up, at least. Not my pick in that race, but I like to see those regional cross sections and see how one region compares with another. We'll get a little bit of sense of that in the Chaluki Stakes, one of the few graded stakes races in North America coming up this week for the thoroughbreds. Back to the schedule as we turn our attention to Del Mar. 2 stakes races on the Saturday card at Old Del Mar. We're going to look at one of those 2, the Desi Arnaz Stakes. 7 furlongs on the main track here. 100 grander, the Desi Arnaz for the 2-year-old filly. So this could get a filly ready for the Starlet Stakes, perhaps at Los Alamitos, going long at the end of the season in December. Desi Arnaz, of course, the famous actor. A lot of these Del Mar Stakes named for the old Hollywood silver screen types in here. You ever run into Desi Arnaz in your days?
I don't believe I ever did. He probably was at Hollywood. Hollywood, when I was there, we were up on the roof, and, I didn't get downstairs, but there were a lot of celebrities at Hollywood while I was there. But no, I don't think I ever saw Desi, but that would have been fun because as a kid, I was a big I Love Lucy fan.
I ran into John Lovitz in the winner's circle for the
Really?
Kentucky Oaks in 1999 when Silver Bullet Day won. And John Lovitz is screaming. He's wagging his tickets in my face. And he says, I got it. And he showed me his tickets. He bet 10 to win on Silver Bullet Day. She was 1-9. I said, you realize that's only going to pay $11, don't you? And his reply to me is something I can't say on the podcast.
That's a good one.
Let's talk Desi Arnaz Stakes here.
Sure.
Who do you like in this? When Justique was so impressive in that first victory, then they stretched her out and she didn't have the same kind of kick around 2 turns. Does she turn back to 1 turn and kind of show off that late kick that she did at Del Mar in the debut? 7 furlongs would seem to suit somebody like her. Who'd you end up with in this spot?
I went, and this is, I just thought of this, I ended up with Hunting Coco, the 4, who finished so poorly and stopped so bad. If we had showed video for that race that she came out of, the Chandelier with Justique, that the pan camera wouldn't have even picked her up, so it wouldn't have even been worth showing. But, Hunting Coco at Del Mar ran a really nice buyer, drew off, was impressive, came back in the Chandelier, and, seemed to be very well placed. Was a little, was right toward the inside, well placed, and then about the 5/16 just absolutely gave up. Something clearly went wrong. But Baffert's worked her 4 times since then. She seems like she's cranked up for this. The works have been pretty good. I'm going to give Hunting Coco a shot, figuring something was amiss that day. Justique, justified favorite. Blessed Touch. I'm just not sure about her. I mean, she was impressive and had an unbelievable uptick in her form from start 1 to start 2. Maybe she just loves Santa Anita, but I got to see Blessed Touch again.
Yeah.
She's going to beat me if she, and she's a justified favorite. But, and there's 3 that are immediate tosses in this race that appear hopelessly overmatched.
Yeah.
And then the other 4, Parody, Justique, Hunting Coco, and Blessed Touch, all appear to be, to me, a bit close. There's all some question marks about them. So I'm gonna take Hunting Coco, and she's not normally the type I usually pick. I usually like a little recency bias, and her last race was really atrocious. But this is a different spot, and I think 1 turn might be better for her.
Might help your price in this particular deal. Like you said, the recency bias, people are going to look at that last result and say, yeah, show it to me. But that will help you in the tote. And that's what it's all about here, trying to pick winners at decent prices. Coming up on Saturday at Lone Star Park, Jim will be high above the racetrack, calling the races for the $1 million Texas Classic Futurity and the full card that goes with it. A lot going on, Jim, with stakes races on Saturday at Lone Star in your backyard. We're going to talk about 4 of those. The first of which is the Yellow Rose of Texas in race number 6. 400 yards, straightaway run here in the quarter horse season. We don't talk quarter horses a whole lot here in the podcast, so any kind of insights you can give our fans here will absolutely be appreciated. I still handicap the quarters. I like to stay involved with it. I kind of find quarter horse handicapping a little bit easier than thoroughbred handicapping. You're not dealing so much with race shapes and pace and things like that, trainer intent, workouts. It's loaded cannons, a keg of dynamite. If they get out of the gate and go, they're going to run their race. Can you get them to match up? Can you get them away from other horses who tend to get in trouble? Those, to me, are kind of like the handicapping axioms when it comes to the quarter horses. So I think it's a little bit easier process. We've got a field of 6 here in the Yellow Rose of Texas. That would make you feel like there's probably less chance of some trouble in this race. So does a race like this for you with a field of 6 and good talented stakes horses, is it just about the speed at this point?
I think so. Speed and who they've been facing. We had a colleague, the late Paul Nicholson. I don't know if you ever worked with Paul at Remington,
No.
but he was an Equibase chart caller. He was a track announcer at one time. Paul believed that when he would be beaten in his handicapping by some 5,000 quarter horse claimer that beat a stakes horse, he'd come into the booth slapping his program saying there is no class in quarter horse racing because it is largely a race against the clock. But when you get to this level, there is a big difference between the SS Classy Jesses of the world and everybody else. And so, good start. And I think, if you watch the races closely enough, you can see the tendencies that horses have to get in trouble. And I tend to avoid the trouble-prone ones. And also ones that have legitimate excuses last time. Quarter horse racing is easier, I think, to handicap. I agree with you on that. It's easier to call them as well, even though it's nerve-wracking. It's all get out. It's a one-dimensional situation from the race call and even the handicapping. But I enjoy handicapping as well. The quarter horses, and SS Classy Jess has won the 2 other editions of the Yellow Rose. This is a relatively new race. Texas bred fillies. She breaks well. She can run versatile distances. I don't particularly care. One angle I really don't like are quarter horses that tend to be more comfortable at 400 or 440, suddenly shortening back up, unless they're just brilliantly talented.
Right.
But she can run just about any distance you want. She shows wins here on 110. She shows wins at 400. She's normally a splendid breaker. And I think in a field like this, these races tend to be, I shouldn't say this, but somewhat trouble-free, especially compared to the Futurity and the 2-year-old types. Yeah. So I hate to pick a heavy favorite, but SS Classy Jess. Another thing that's important, too, about quarter horses is where they draw, because early in the meet, our rail was not great. It was not really the place to be. Lately, the rail's gotten pretty good. So Lethal White Veil, who drew the inside for a very hot trainer, I think she could be really tough in here as well if something is amiss with SS Classy Jess.
And we're playing exactas, and I wouldn't get into tries and supers in a 6-horse field. I think that's bad business in betting, but an exacta certainly in a 6-horse field with the one Lethal White Veil underneath. Cool thing about SS Classy Jess is she's 24 for 49 lifetime. A win here makes her 25 for 50, and boy, that looks good on her resume. 25 for 50. I mean, wow. And she's got 7 wins over the track at Lone Star. The rest of the field is 5 combined. I mean, she looks very, very tough in the 6th race, the Yellow Rose of Texas. Let's go to the BF Phillips Jr. Stakes, race number 7 on the card. It's a $50,000 race. These are Texas bred older horses in here. 400 yards is the distance. Jim, how did you shake this one down in the BF Phillips?
This one's pretty wide open. I wound up going with Shotgun in here. There's really interesting horse on the outside who sounds like a filly, but it isn't. Jet Black Grace. I always think that this is a filly. I want to say her. Jet Black Grace was 5 for 5 last year. Won the Heritage Place Futurity, which is Remington's richest Futurity and one of the biggest in the country. Came out and made our Texas Classic Futurity last year and was actually favored in that race and ran 4th, as you can see in the PPs. But he's been off since then. He's been off about a year. And even though Santos Carrizales is one of the hottest trainers in the country, I'm going with Shotgun. He usually faces open company. He's facing Texas breds. I think even though our Texas bred quarter horses are very good, I think that's a subtle drop there. And I'm taking him on Shotgun on the overall body of work. He comes out of the Labor Day weekend stakes at Ruidoso, where he really didn't run that much, but he had some trouble. But overall body of work, I like him. But the horse I like underneath him, even more than Jet Black Grace, is His Time to Deal. This damn Lady Lilia produces a ton of really good runners, including stakes runners. This horse was very confidently ridden in that race behind world champion Danger at Horseshoe Indianapolis last time. I think Ali Rivera kind of knew that when the way the race shaped up, he was riding the horse hard, but I think he realized 4th was probably where he was going to be. There was a big gap back to the 5th place horse. He took good care of this horse. His Time to Deal seems to like this track, so I like him for 2nd.
Yeah, if you watch a replay of that race, Danger kind of had that race under wraps 200 yards in, right? I mean, so everybody riding in behind knows I'm not getting that guy. I mean, he was clear and whistling that day at Indy. Let's go to the 8th race on the card. It's the Texas Classic Juvenile Stakes on Saturday night at Lone Star Park. Post time for this one, 10:21 Eastern, 9:21 Central. Set your clock, stay up late for some good action there. You also have some simulcast racing on the thoroughbred side. Remington will be running concurrently. So some good stuff in that region of the country to be playing on Saturday night. Texas Classic Juvenile, in the old days, you'd have called this the Consolation, which are the qualifiers 11 through 20 for the trials that didn't make it into the top 10 for the final. Texas Classic Juvenile, a $50,000 purse here. There's some good names in here, Jim. When you had 2 nights of trials trying to get in to the 10 finalist spots, that means there's going to be some good horses on the fringes, and we ended up with that.
No doubt about it. My Texas Classic PPs, the Juvenile, are out of my reach, so I'm going to do something odd and lean out of the shot for a second. If you want to put the graphic up.
Yeah, so sure. I'll tell you what. We can buy you a little bit of time with that.
All right.
Kind of remind people that this race is part of the late pick 4. The late pick 4 is going to be on races 8 through 11. So this is the first leg of that late pick 4 that has the $5,000 hit and split. So if you play the late pick 4 just with express bet and first bet at Lone Star Park on Saturday night, you'll hit not only the pari-mutuel winnings that you get for hitting that bet, but you'll split $5,000 with just players on the first bet and express bet platforms. So kickoff leg to that late pick 4. The magic of podcasting, Jim, we can make anything happen. I mean, if you need to go make a sandwich or anything and come back for the second half, we can do it.
Just out of reach.
We could fill time for you. This is what we do. Tell me about your pick in the Texas Classic.
Well, This could have easily, I mean, if you rolled out this Juvenile and said this is the Texas Classic Futurity, the richest horse race in Texas, you'd be just great with it. I mean, you got all 3 big Futurity winners from Remington's tremendous meet, San Lorenzo Ivory, who won the Remington Park Oklahoma bred Futurity, and Trace Crystals, who won the other 2 open Futurities.
Correct.
I went with, this was, to me, was an eyelash. I went with Trace Crystals over San Lorenzo Ivory. The only reason I went against San Lorenzo Ivory, who I've always loved and who has run just massively in all 7 starts, is he drifted out real bad in the trial. And he wound up probably in the 10 path by the end of the race. Sometimes I worry about that, and it doesn't mean a thing. We had a horse a few years ago here, Win the Dash for Cash Futurity, that always drifted out like that. And he was so clear of everybody else, it didn't matter. But San Lorenzo Ivory ran a great trial, but I'm going to go with Trace Crystals. He doesn't look like much when he's in action. He's on his inside lead. He raced on his inside lead in the trial. Horses on their inside lead, there's a lot of discussion about whether that means anything. I'm not a horseman to know whether that means anything, but it just doesn't look as pretty when they come to the finish.
Right.
But still, Trace Crystals, he may have a little bit of a weird stride, but he's, to me, beat him to collect. So a JMG Apolitical Capo is also one to factor in there. I think it's those 3 and everybody else, pretty much.
And you look at you talked about San Lorenzo Ivory drifting out in that trial. That's the difference between qualifying and not qualifying, probably, right? I mean, the straight line is the fastest way home, as they say. And so horses who have a little bit of that inside-outside action may not hurt them individually in a race, right? They're running against the competition. They've got them measured. They do their thing. But when you're racing just against the clock to be a top 10 qualifier, that might have been the difference between making the finals and not making the finals. And really, on trials night, there were 2 different nights. So only 5 qualified the first night and 5 the second night. So when you're racing against only 5 other horses on an entire program for the fastest time, a drift like that can be enough to send you to the consolation prize. Texas Classic Derby is next up in race number 9, and we've got ourselves a bona fide quarter horse superstar in that one. 30 winner. Keep your eyes on the outside for KJ
And it's early
Desperado.
speed for FDD Scout at the rail. FDD Scout is in front. Jess Saban Candy has a lot of ground to make up on the outside. KJ Desperado is flying. KJ Desperado in a photo with FDD Scout, followed up by, I think, Sippin' Hayden, and the Triple Crown Dream comes to an end.
That was the signature win for KJ Desperado, but there's not a lot of losses on the resume. This horse is 11 for 16 lifetime, Jim. 3 for 3 at Lone Star Park. Does anybody stop the train that is KJ Desperado here in the Texas Classic Derby?
You know, I can't endorse anybody else to stop it. You know, I mean, as a handicapper, you know, I really love to try to pick horses that are prices and whatnot, and give out some kind of special information. But I mean, I got to go with him on top until he proves otherwise. You know, it's odd, since that All-American Futurity, you know, he's won almost every race he's been in, except he ran second in the Rainbow Derby this year. But since then, they've almost all been blowouts. I mean, he typically doesn't even toy with the competition. Right. That race, he really had to mow him down from the outside. But yeah, I'm with him. You know, Les Giles qualified the 3 fastest. KJ and the big favorite actually tied with the top time. And the big favorite starts inside, which early in the meet, as I mentioned, wasn't a great advantage, but now it's not bad at all. Right. And we assume there will be a fast track on Saturday. There's only slight chances of rain on Friday and Saturday. So for Saturday, we should be fast. It should be in the mid-40s. So typical fall weather. The big favorite I like second, San Lorenzo Tay, who won the Remington Oklahoma bred Futurity last year. Right. And then was just hasn't been the same this year. So I think he's my third pick. But KJ, to me, he just beats everybody pretty much that they lead him over against, except that one race in the Rainbow Derby when he just missed.
And a little clarity for people who don't have past performances or entries in front of him. KJ Desperado is the big favorite in this race, but there is the horse named the big favorite. So when you talk about I like KJ Desperado and the big favorite, they're actually 2 different horses in this spot.
That's a good point.
KJ will be the big favorite, but playing by numbers, that would be a 5-1 potential exact in there, both for Trader Wes Giles. Let's go to the 10th race. Go ahead, Jim.
If I could step in for a second, sure. You know this from having listened to my calls. I come from an old school. I worked under Marge Everett, who didn't like the track announcer to be high profile, if that's a weird thing to say for somebody who's on the PA system. But I don't normally go for cutesy things, but the big favorite faced San Lorenzo Tay in the trials. San Lorenzo Tay was even money. So he was the big favorite in the race. And I said coming to the wire that the big favorite is upsetting the big favorite in the call. And it's one of the few times I will lean towards shtick in the race call. But anyway, and there was a race before that, the trial before that, the name of the horse was the heavy favorite. So we could end up with the heavy favorite and the big favorite facing each other at some point.
You don't want those two in the same race. I can't imagine.
Not particularly.
I can't imagine any race caller really rooting for that.
I'd be fine with them skipping. I'd be fine with them being separate.
Yeah, for sure. Get them in a mutual entry, and then they'll wear the same silks with just a different color cap. That would really make it even more fun for an announcer.
Too bad we banned those here. Yeah.
Lone Star Park race number 10 on Saturday is the big one. It's the $1 million Texas Classic Futurity. Look, fans, if you're not used to quarter horse racing and you're usually here with our Thoroughbred podcast, the money in quarter horse racing is with the 2-year-olds, while the 3-year-olds are the glamour division in Thoroughbred racing with all of our derbies and Triple Crown. In quarter horse racing, it's all about the 2-year-olds. That's where the big cash is. All-American Futurity worth $2 million on Labor Day. Texas Classic Futurity here. One of the last real big money shots for the 2-year-olds. You also have the Los Alamitos will have another big Futurity yet
the $2 million,
before the end of the year. The Los Al $2 million. So Texas Classic Futurity, a big one, especially in this part of the country, in the Mid-South and the Southwest. Jim, this race has got a good history, and we've got another big-time field here this year setting up to go. 10 fastest qualifiers were over 2 nights, 2 different sets of conditions on those nights. One night we had the sloppy track. One night there was a headwind. One night there was a tailwind. So when you evaluate the raw times for this Texas Classic Futurity field, you've got to treat them as 2 separate entities. Speed figures are helpful in a case like this because, again, the headwind versus the tailwind on those 2 nights, you just don't want to look at the raw clockings here.
Yeah, exactly. You know, we had a sloppy track for the second night, which was the first time all meet that the track had come up off. We had a fast track the entire meet. It's been very dry down here until Halloween weekend. But, you really do have to separate the 2 days. But thankfully, at this point in the year, these 2-year-olds have run enough that you can get a pretty good idea from previous races. And, this one looked like a showdown between, on the morning line, which is done very expertly here by Rick Lee, Rocket Just V is 8-5, Doing It Just for Fun, who happens to be a full brother to Jesse's First Down, the two-time world champion from a few years ago, is 7-5. And then it's kind of everybody else falling in behind. I'm on Rocket Just V, who was a supplemental entrant and was has drawn perfectly. That 3-hole is about the perfect place in our track to be drawn. Better, I think, than being way outside. Not because of the track conditions so much as just the results seem to bear that out. But don't forget completely about One Perfect Lady. She has been super sharp. She won our Grade 2 Dash for Cash Futurity. She was stuck on kind of a dead rail opening night and ran second in the trial for the Dash for Cash, but came back to win. She's another one that has slightly odd action. I was watching her trial victory for this race, and she kind of paddles a little with her right front. She's kind of a weird, but man, is she fast. So, Rocket Just V, supplemental entry, Santos Carrizales. This horse has already won the Invitational for the Ruidoso and the All-American, but not the Invitational, the Juvenile. I still liked it when we called them consolations myself.
I did too.
Language was blunter back then,
Yeah, right. It's like there's no shame in being in the consolation.
Yeah,
Come on.
Exactly. It is a consolation. But nonetheless, so I'm leaning toward him. He rarely loses, and he's very fast. He's drawn perfect. So
let's take a look at Jim's top pick, Rocket Just V, from the trials back a couple weeks ago.
And they're off. And a clean start. Rocket Just V, the supplemental entrant, immediately on the lead. KJ Wicked Wanda is chasing. Red Reason is about 2 lengths off the leader. And then right around in the orange cap on the outside. A race against the clock for Rocket Just V, a daylight winner here.
Daylight in the darkness and in the raindrops, maybe, but that's got to be an announcer's dream, at least, to have a horse break clean like that, clear in front and in command of the race. Not a whole lot of panic in the call in that one, Jim. That race was in control, probably 50, 75 yards in.
Yeah, 3 to 10 odds. So as a race caller, you're keeping an eye on, in quarter horse racing especially, how those overwhelming favorites get out. I was focused right on him right from the start. And that was a marvelous performance. I think he, and Doing It Just for Fun, who was also a brilliant trial winner. This horse has never won a race other than a maiden or a trial event. So Doing It Just for Fun, who's Jesse's First Down's brother, gets a big test here. But he might be good enough to win it. But the ones that I like, to keep an eye on at least and watch the tote action on. I mentioned One Perfect Lady and also Curl's Joyful Wagon. It wasn't very long ago that this horse's sister, this filly's sister, Curl's Happy Wagon, was a super good filly in this part of the country. She won the Grade 1 Millie Vessels out at Los Alamitos.
Right.
Curl's Joyful Wagon races for some of the same connections. Her trial was super impressive as a heavy favorite as well on that sloppy night. So I seem to be leaning a little bit toward the sloppy night trials, but no particular reason for that. But if you're fishing around for a long shot to maybe use in behind these top 2 favorites, I think the 2 fillies, or 2 of the fillies, the 2 and the 5 there might be worth looking at.
One Perfect Lady, the 2 you mentioned, 12-1 in the morning line for Rick Lee, and the 5, Curl's Joyful Wagon, 20-1 in the morning line. So again, some nice prices there underneath from Jim for the Texas Classic Futurity. Maybe you want to take a shot on one of those long shots with the money back special as well. Remember, up to $10 back when you bet with Express Bet and First Bet on these stakes races throughout the card. Races 6 through 10 at Lone Star on Saturday night. If your win bet finishes second or third, you'll get up to $10 back. So if you bet $8, you get the whole 8 back. If you bet $20, you'll get 10 of the 20 back. So maybe a chance to take a look at some of those price horses if they happen to run second or third. No harm, no foul, and that's one of the beauties of that particular promotion. That's going to wrap up our handicapping for this weekend. A lot going on around the racing game. Of course, Texas Classic Futurity Saturday night at Lone Star Park, our big focus. It's opening day today at Fairgrounds. By the time this podcast runs, you'll be deep into the past performances. Twilight card at Fairgrounds. I think first post is 4 Eastern for that one, so be sure to check that out with Fairgrounds opening day today. And Sunday stakes Horse racing is pretty good around the country. The Bob Hope at Del Mar will be a grade 3 7-furlong sprint for the 2-year-olds in there, where having a meltdown. Bob Baffert's runner-up in the Del Mar Futurity back there. Could be a prep towards the Los Al Futurity. So that's the big race on Sunday, the Bob Hope. And if you're playing around the first family of racetracks, don't want to forget that Saturday we've got the Oakland Stakes coming up at Golden Gate Field. So good weekend of action all around the country. And Jim, it's been great catching up with you, reminiscing a little bit, sharing some handicapping thoughts. Let's not make it so long next time.
Yeah, definitely. It's been fun following you on Twitter as well. And definitely have to do it again. And thanks for having me here to fill in for Jeff, who I, shared a press box with for a brief time out in LA and always admired. He was, brilliant back then. And so I learned a lot from him just listening in.
One of the great handicappers in the game. I learn something every week when I do this with Jeff. And one of the great race callers in the games, folks, Jim Byers. We'll give him his due this weekend with $1 million race. Jim, may they all spread out nicely for you. Somebody open up 2 lengths and take the heat off.
At least a half a length, yeah. But yeah, if they if the winner is clear, I'm happy in a race like that. You don't want to equivocate on a $1 million race if you can avoid it.
All right, it's been a great time handicapping this week. We'll be back on Tuesday with the It's Official podcast. Jeff will return from Las Vegas and all of his basketball doings there, as we'll take 5 topics from the weekend and we make them official every Tuesday. On behalf of my partner today, Jim Byers, and all the people at First and Express Bet, I'm Jeremy Plonk. Have a great weekend. Good luck at the races.